value at any given point on a sine wave is called the amplitude. When permanent magnets are used to produce the north and south poles, the magnetic field produced is constant. The device used to measure current flow in a circuit is the ammeter. The component attached to the ends of the conductor loops, in a simple AC generator, is the slip rings. Voltage is only generated while the rotating conductor is crossing or cutting the lines of force within the magnetic field. The voltage generated in the loop at any given point is proportional to the rotational velocity. The voltage generated in the loop at any given point is proportional to the length of the conductor exposed to the magnetic field. The strength of the magnetic field is measured in Weber/m2. The instantaneous value of EMF is equal to the maximum value multiplied by the sine of the angle of rotation. As the armature rotates past 90 degrees, the voltage produced will decrease. The sequence from 0 volts to a maximum, and returning to 0 is called a alternation. The number of cycles that occur in 1 second is called the frequency. To determine the AC values of current and voltage that have the same effect on a resistive circuit as a DC power source, what is calculated? Root mean square. The square root of the mean of the squares of the instantaneous values of current or voltage during a complete cycle is referred to as root mean square. When the voltage and current both reach a value of 0 at the same time, the circuit is said to be in phase. The formula E equal Lx rate of current increase is used to determine induced EMF. Why is induced voltage considered to be negative? Induced voltage opposes the applied voltage. The rate of current change at any instant, in a purely inductive circuit, is proportional to the instantaneous slope of the current wave. In a purely inductive circuit, the current lags the applied voltage by 90 electrical degrees. The capacitance of a circuit is measured in farads. The increase of charge in a capacitive circuit is measured in coulombs. In a purely capacitive circuit, the current leads the applied voltage by 90 electrical degrees. In a purely capacitive circuit, the instantaneous current is negative, while the instantaneous voltage is positive, between the angles of 90 and 180 electrical degrees. Vectors that represent the relationship between current and voltage are called phasors. The power in an electrical circuit that can do useful work is referred to as true power. The power absorbed due to the existence of capacitive reactance, inductive reactance, or both, in a circuit is called reactive power. The actual power generated and transmitted, in order to satisfy a circuit's resistance and impedance is called apparent power. The unit for apparent power is the VA. When transmitting power, the line losses and system voltage drop are affected by current flow. An AC machine that can be used as a generator or as a motor is the synchronous motor. Synchronous motors can be operated with lagging, leading, or unity power factors by adjusting the motor's field excitation current. A three-phase generator is an electrical machine with three sets of stator windings placed precisely 120 electrical degrees apart. In a delta-connected machine, the line voltage equals the phase voltage. To determine the current flow through the segments of the coil in a generator, use the right-hand rule. In a DC machine, more poles provide a stronger field, and therefore a higher induced voltage. Commutation takes place at the point where the armature coil is moving blank to the stator field. Parallel. Compensating windings, or pole phase windings, can be used to reduce the effects of armature reaction. An interpole has the blank polarity as the following pole in the direction of rotation. Same. The interpole field must be strong enough to neutralize the flux that is shifted into the neutral plane by the effect of the armature reaction. Armature windings of DC generators fall into the following two categories: lap and wave. Wave windings are used in high voltage applications. series wound generators use very low resistance field coils. Because of the increased voltage drop through the armature, shunt windings are supplied blank voltage as generator load increases. Reduced. In compound wound generators, more turns in the series field produce a blank voltage with the same current. Higher. Field windings of a shunt wound generator are blank with the armature windings. In parallel. If the series field is wound with less than the minimum number of turns required for a flat compounded machine, a blank machine results. Overcompounded. When inherent overload protection is more desirable than a fixed voltage, blank generators are used. Differential compounded. If a new generator is being installed or an existing generator has been repaired, prior to bringing a DC generator online, the output terminals must be checked for polarity. When bringing a generator online, the prime mover must be started and the generator brought to operating speed. The next step is to the field switch is closed to energize the excitation field and establish terminal voltage. Once all DC generators are online, the load can be shifted or balanced by adjusting the field rheostats. When compounded machines of different kW ratings are paralleled, the blank ensures a division of load in proportion to the kW ratings of each machine. Equalizer. Changing the resistance of the field windings in a DC generator is the process of voltage control. In a DC motor, what is produced by the force that develops on the armature windings due to the interaction of the armature and stator magnetic fields. Torque. The direction of rotation of a DC motor may be reversed by reversing either the field or the armature connections. The electromotive force induced in the armature winding of a DC motor as it moves through the magnetic field is called back EMF. A reduction of the field flux of a motor causes the motor speed to increase. In a shunt wound DC motor, wire the interpoles in series with the armature circuit. It allows them to respond to armature current changes. When the field winding is opened, what does the shunt motor tend to speed up rather than stop when unloaded? Residual magnetism of the pole pieces maintain the weak field. In a series motor, torque and speed are inversely proportional. The speed of a series motor may be adjusted by placing a rheostat in the armature circuit. The cumulative compound motor produces blank torque than a shunt motor. More. What is an advantage of a differential compound motor? The motor operates at constant speed under varying load conditions. The time limit compound motor starter removes armature resistance at defined time intervals. The armature current produced by dynamic braking is in the opposite direction of motion to the armature. A type of braking used extensively on electrified railroads, and to some extent with elevators and winches is regenerative braking. Windage, a cause of power loss in a DC machine, is defined as friction against ambient air as the armature rotates. When the materials used to construct the core of the armature have electricity conducted through them, what is formed? Eddy currents. The electrical energy dissipated as heat from the armature in field windings is referred to as copper losses. Several separately wound pole pieces bolted to the frame of the rotor is the construction of what type of rotor? Salient rotor. The type of rotor with windings arranged to form 2 or 4 distinct poles that are firmly embedded in slots is the cylindrical rotor. The 3 main design constraints of alternator rotors are temperature, centrifugal force, and insulation of the rotor conductors. The speed that is necessary to generate a given frequency on an AC generator is referred to as synchronous speed. How is the voltage controlled to an exciter for an alternator? Using a voltage regulator. What type of exciter is used most commonly used on almost all modern synchronous generators? Brushless exciter. When using a small AC generator on the main shaft to generate the excitation field, what can be commonly used instead of a conventional commutator? A 3-phase rotating rectifier. What type of regulator depends upon the adjustment of variable resistances in the field circuit of the main exciter? Direct acting rheostat regulator. A silverstat voltage regulator. Uses a stabilizing transformer and a compensating circuit for parallel operation. A disadvantage of an electromechanical voltage regulator is the deadband is not acceptable for steady-state conditions when running at upper limits. The type of amplifier that is found to be the most reliable when used in electronic regulators is the magnetic amplifier. An advantage of a magnetic amplifier regulator is the regulator is solid state, has a rapid response time, and no deadband. Modern voltage regulators maintain voltage within +/1.5%. Mounting a fan on the rotor shaft is a method of providing direct air cooling. An advantage of hydrogen cooling systems is a buildup of acids that may attack the insulation on the rotor and stator windings is avoided. An advantage of hydrogen cooling over air cooling is heat is rejected more rapidly in the cooling stages. Cooling water systems are more complex and more costly, but this is offset by significantly smaller physical size. The type of seals used to compensate for the radial and axial forces that the shaft experiences in a hydrogen-cooled motor is the thrust ring type. What causes a parallel to alternator to develop a leading power factor and increase its current output without increasing the true power output? Being underexcited. If the phase rotation of an alternator is found to be incorrect, what must be done to correct the situation? Two of the leads must be reversed. A device that gives a clear picture of the phase relationship between the incoming alternator and system voltages is the synchroscope. When additional load is being placed on an alternator, being underexcited will lead to a leading power factor. In an average electrical system with inductive, capacitive, and resistive loads, the resulting power factor will be between unity and 0.8 lagging. The ratio of the amount of field current needed to produce a rated open circuit stator voltage to the field current needed to produce the rated stator current with all three phases short-circuited is called short circuit ratio. A squirrel cage rotor is a common design of AC induction motor. Why are the rotor bars of an AC motor often angled along the body of the rotor? It ensures that a smooth and steady acceleration is produced while the motor is started. Why is it important to keep the air gap between the rotor and stator at a minimum? Air is a poor conductor of magnetic flux. The torque produced by a motor if the rotor is held stationary and full voltage is applied is referred to as locked rotor torque or starting torque. The point when a motor comes to a complete stop, when being overloaded, is referred to as breakdown torque or pull-out torque. The amount of current the motor draws under full load conditions is called full load amps. This is also known as nameplate amps. Another term for locked rotor amps is in-rush current. What must be used when the supply voltage must be reduced to allow a motor to start and then increase to full load level? A reduced voltage starter. When it is desirable to have some control of motor speed and have a higher starting torque, what can be done with the rotor design? The starting torque can be varied by varying the rotor resistance. In an AC motor, as frequency and current increase, hysteresis and eddy current losses increase. Why do some shaded pole motors have two shading rings on each pole piece? It allows for the rotation to be reversed. Using a start winding and run winding is a characteristic of what type of motor? Split-phase motor. The type of motor with the highest starting torque of all single-phase induction motors is the repulsion start motor. How does a synchronous motor differ from a conventional AC induction motor? This synchronous motor operates without slip. How is the speed of rotation of the field windings controlled in a synchronous motor? By the frequency of the AC power supply. What speed is an external exciter motor designed to bring a synchronous motor up to? About 90% of its synchronous speed. Instead of an external exciter motor, what can we use to start a synchronous machine? Damper windings, which allow the motor to be started as an induction motor. How can a synchronous motor be used to correct a lagging power factor? By overexciting the rotor windings. What is an advantage of AC synchronous motors over other types of AC motors? They operate with a higher efficiency. How is leakage flux minimized in a transformer? An iron or steel core is used to redirect the flux. Why is core design used for high voltage transformers? It is easier to insulate and cool. What is the advantage of the shell type over the core type design of transformers? It is more efficient in channeling core flux, so fewer turns are required. The amount of current that the transformer can supply at a certain voltage is referred to as the kilovolt amperes rating. Unlike resistance, which is unaffected by the circuit current or voltage, inductive reactance is directly proportional to frequency. How do high altitudes affect the performance of a transformer? It reduces the ability of air to cool the transformer. What is the rating that indicates how well a transformer tolerates harmonics? K factor. What causes copper losses in a transformer? The resistance of the primary winding and secondary winding. What causes iron loss in a transformer? The energy required to sustain the magnetic field in the steel core. Circulating currents induced by the core material in a transformer are referred to as eddy currents. What is conducted to determine a transformer's copper losses? A short circuit test. During a short circuit test, the voltage needed to produce full load current is only 2 to 10% of the rated voltage. What is conducted to determine a transformer's iron losses? An open circuit test. Dry-type transformers have an input voltage limit of 600 volts or less. What does the breather pipe on an oil-cooled transformer typically have? A filter and moisture-absorbing desiccant. If the first letter stamped on the nameplate of a transformer is K, what does this indicate? Insulating liquid with a flash point greater than 300 degrees Celsius. If an oil and water heat exchanger is attached to the outside of the tank of a transformer, this would indicate what type of cooling system? A liquid immersed, water-cooled system. The two methods of connecting the three individual sets of windings in a three-phase transformer are star and delta. A primary voltage of 600 volts and a secondary voltage of 120 volts is an indication of what type of transformer? A step-down transformer. Why is short-circuiting dangerous in a parallel transformer configuration? The current can reach very high values due to the impedance being cut in half. How are the high and low voltage signs of three-phase transformers identified? The high voltage windings are marked with an H and low voltage windings are marked with an X. Instrument transformers that provide signals proportional to the amount of current flowing are referred to as current transformers. What is used to measure the flow through an instrument potential transformer? A voltmeter. What causes gas to be produced within a transformer? Breakdown of cooling oil and insulation. Where are winding temperature sensors placed in a transformer? In the primary windings, secondary windings, or both? Overexcitation of a transformer is indicated by the primary winding exceeding safe current limits. Observing current flowing through the metalwork of the transformer is an indication of a ground fault. What is meant by the continuous rating of a circuit breaker? The ability of the breaker to continuously carry a certain amount of current. How does temperature affect the continuous rating of a breaker? As the temperature increases, the rating decreases. What is meant by the interrupting capacity of a breaker? The capability of the breaker to safely open an electrical circuit that is carrying a dangerous amount of current. When are single-element fast-acting fuses used? For protection of circuits with little or no inrush current surges. When is it suitable to use renewable fuses in place of one-time fuses? Renewable fuses must never be substituted where one-time fuses are specified. In a dual-element time delay fuse, the time delay thermal cutout operates on overload currents up to 500% of normal current. How does a current limiting fuse work? The element overheats and vaporizes, and the high temperature of the arc melts the sand around the element, causing a higher resistance. What is the term for when, in a breaker, the current flow causes air to ionize and thereby maintain the arc? Restriking voltage. A bimetal strip that heats during an overload condition is referred to as a thermal element. When can an instantaneous trip circuit breaker be used? Only for short circuit protection. The type of breaker used as a low-voltage air circuit breaker is molded case circuit breakers. To provide protection from stator overheating, what are embedded in the slots with the stator windings of generators larger than 500 to 1000 kVA? Resistance temperature detector coils. What is the purpose of the oil in an oil-immersed circuit breaker? To provide adequate cooling to the breaker contacts when an arc occurs. What is the advantage of the air blast circuit breaker? The higher speed of operation allows faster reclosure when a fault is corrected. What type of breaker contains a sealed ceramic or steel cylinder that prevents ionization of the arc products during current interruption? A vacuum breaker. If a disconnect switch is used to isolate a motor, why must the motor be turned off and the main breaker open before the disconnect switch is operated? Disconnect switches are not robust enough for interrupting current. In a magnetic contactor, what is the purpose of the pole shader? The pole shader causes the flux in the shaded part of the pole face to lag behind the flux in the non-shaded part. As a simple form of instantaneous overcurrent protection, a time delay that is built into a relay in the form of a mechanical dashpot is known as time overcurrent protection. An advantage of an induction cup relay over an induction disc relay is they have a faster response time. To provide protection from stator overheating, water embedded in the slots with the stator windings of generators larger than 500 to 1000 kVA. Resistance temperature detector coils. In what case would overload elements not be required in all three phases of a motor? In motors rated at 1100 kilowatts and below. A long-duration inverse time overcurrent relay activates an alarm and allows the operator to trip the equipment. Using thermal overcurrent relays with bimetallic spiral strips has the advantage of preventing restart of the motor until the relay has cooled. Why would a motor have a limit to the maximum number of starts over a period of time? To allow for the stator or rotor windings to cool. Reciprocating, diaphragm, sliding vane, rotary screw and lobe compressors are all referred to as types of positive displacement compressors. Why would a facility buy an oversized motor for a particular application? The actual load conditions may not be fully known. When a compressor needs to be started up slowly and operated at different speeds, the ideal prime mover would be a steam turbine. If higher pressures are required from a compressor, what can be done? Additional stages can be added to the compressor. The most common type of small compressors are either vertical or V single acting air-cooled. To allow for higher pressures from a two-stage compressor, the stages are arranged in series. Why are shaft packing and tight casing covers required on the crankcase openings of heavy-duty compressors? To protect against leakage of oil and the entrance of dust and contaminants. The most common type of inlet and discharge valves used on air compressors are display type. The typical operating range of sliding vane compressors is 250 to 300 RPM. In some sliding vane models, what is an advantage of using wear rings? Power requirements are reduced. Because slope-type compressors are positive displacement compressors, they require wood in the delivery line upstream of any block valve. A safety relief valve. An advantage of a screw compressor is continuous compression and pulse-free air. An advantage of tandem screw compressors over single-stage compressors is lower power requirements. The typical liquid used in a liquid seal compressor, when air is being compressed, is water. A steady small stream of water is continuously fed to a liquid-sealed compressor in order to cool the compressor. After leaving the impeller of a centrifugal compressor, the air passes through the casing where further conversion of what occurs? Velocity to pressure. Why is the space maintained between the oil and air seals of a centrifugal compressor? To allow the oil to drain away and not enter the airstream. The two main types of multi-stage centrifugal compressor casings are the horizontally split and barrel type. Axial flow compressor off-flow volumes range from 40,000 to 1 million cubic meters per hour. The most common method of cooling small and medium-sized single-acting air compressors is air cooling. How much of the heat generated is absorbed by water as it circulates through the cylinder jackets of a water-cooled compressor? 15%. Intercoolers installed between the stages of air-cooled compressors are usually air-cooled. A risk of overcooling the air in an intercooler is corrosion and damage to the valves from condensed water. Aftercoolers are most commonly cooled with water. The type of air dryer in which water vapor passes through into a purge air is the membrane dryer. The least expensive type of desiccant is silica gel. Approximately how much air is required from the compressed air in order to dry the desiccant in a regenerating tower for a heatless dryer system? 15 to 18%. The expected lifespan of desiccant is 3 to 5 years. What is an issue with installing too small of an air receiver? Pressure waves increase in magnitude, causing an increase in power consumption. How are very fine particles of dust, sand, and grit removed from the air? By installing suction filters. When is it particularly important for air to be oil-free? When using the air in instruments. What pressure differential set point provides the maximum economy in a start-stop control system? 70 kilopascal. What are two conditions that make start-stop control uneconomical? Continuous demand for air, and an undersized receiver. When operating a compressor with a variable speed control, what is done when no end users are in need of air? The compressor is unloaded. What is the impact to the power requirements of a compressor when a suction unloading valve is used? Power requirements drop as no work is being done. Why is unloading a compressor necessary during startup? It permits the drive to be started easily and brought up to operating speed. What must be installed on the delivery side of an air compressor, and between each stage on multi-stage machines? A spring-loaded safety valve. What is an effective way of monitoring and tracking temperature increases in air temperatures after intercoolers? Computer trends. How does altitude affect a compressor? Higher altitudes reduce the mass of air that can be compressed. What is the total pressure of atmospheric air? The sum of the water vapor partial pressure and the partial pressure of dry air. Why does water not immediately condense out of air that is being cooled? It must first reach the saturation point. A rise of how many degrees doubles the ability of air to hold water? 11°C. What can happen if an air compressor shuts off and the air receiver, made of steel, sees a temperature drop? Moisture can drop out and corrode the receiver. What should be considered when developing a maintenance program for an air compressor system? Recommendations from the equipment vendors. What is a common task that must be included in a preventive maintenance program for an air compressor? Changing or cleaning the inlet air filters. Why is chemical treatment and the control of pH for cooling water necessary? To prevent scaling and corrosion of the heat transfer surfaces. Why is poor piston sealing detrimental to the operation of a compressor? It can produce an increased discharge temperature. What is a protective device commonly found on a typical screw compressor? Low lube oil level. What is a quality that an ideal refrigerant should possess? A non-poisonous nature. Refrigerant R12 can be found in what group? A1. Any refrigerant substitution in an existing refrigeration system must be in accordance with CSAB 52. What type of refrigerant is used primarily in packaged air conditioners? R22. Ammonia that is free of water is referred to as anhydrous ammonia. What is the disadvantage of carbon dioxide as a refrigerant? It requires extremely high head and suction pressures. Why is ethyl chloride being phased out? It is an ozone-depleting substance. Ammonia that immediately flashes off after passing through the expansion valve is referred to as flash gas. The compressor discharge and condenser pressures in an ammonia system range between 1030 and 1200 kPa. An advantage of an indirect system over a direct system is stored food will not spoil if a brine leak occurs. What is a disadvantage of an indirect system over a direct system? A larger quantity of refrigerant is required. What effect does increasing the pressure or decreasing the temperature have on the mass of ammonia that the water can absorb? The mass of ammonia increases. A mixture of gas and water vapor passes upwards from the regenerator to the rectifier. Condensate that collects in the bottom of the rectifier column flows back to the generator. What must also be flowing when strong aqua is being pumped continuously from the absorber to the generator? Weak aqua must be flowing from the generator to the absorber. What must be done when the ratio of compression between evaporator and condenser pressures are too great for a single-stage compressor to handle without developing excessively high discharge temperatures? 2 or more compression stages must be used. What is the term for the rotary compressors used in multi-stage plants that are designed to handle the large specific volume of refrigerant coming from the evaporator? Boosters. What two functions does a liquid and gas cooler located between a very low temperature evaporator and low temperature evaporator perform? It acts as both intercooler and economizer. What is one commercial application of a heat pump system that combines cooling, heating, and defrosting? Truck refrigeration. How is the amount of cooling or heating regulated in a heat pump system? The metering device controls the flow. How are the semiconductors of a thermoelectric module connected? In series electrically and in parallel thermally. What is an advantage to a hermetic system? Better quality control. What is an advantage to enclosing an entire hermetic absorption system in a single shell? There are fewer connections to have leaks. What is the most common type of refrigeration compressor used? Reciprocating compressors. What is the most common material for compressor cylinders? Cast iron. What types of valves are typically found in older slow-speed compressors? Poppet valves. What is the compression ratio limit of a single impeller centrifugal compressor? 1.5 to 2. What is another name for screw compressors? Helical rotary compressors. Which component is the heat exchanger where cooling occurs? The evaporator. What is an advantage to the flooded evaporator? It eliminates any chance of liquid returning to and damaging the compressor. Where does the ammonia gas enter a double pipe condenser? At the top. What is the cooling medium for evaporative condensers? Water. Why is the shell and tube condenser the most common type used? It is very efficient and compact. How full should a liquid receiver be when it contains all the refrigerant in the system? 80%. What is the component in a refrigeration system that is composed of a metal shell containing a desiccant to remove water either by absorption or by chemical combination? A dehydrator. Where does the rich liquid leave an absorber from? The pump suction on the bottom of the absorber. The weights of valves and fittings used in ammonia service are similar to those for extra heavy steam service. Why are valves used in halocarbon refrigerant systems fitted with a seal cap? Leaks are harder to detect than ammonia. What does CSAB 52 require of all copper joints in a refrigeration system? They must be soldered. They must be brazed. Where would a person find the types of equipment that CSAB 52 applies to and the types of equipment that are excluded? In Section 1. What is one of the exclusions listed in CSAB 52? The use of water or air as a refrigerant. The classification of refrigeration systems can be found in Section 4. Above what size do drawings and specifications have to be submitted to the regulatory authority for registration and acceptance? 125 kilowatts. Pressure vessels, with volumes less than 0.085 cubic meters, need pressure relief devices or fusible plug, unless the diameter is less than 152 millimeters. Controls that start or stop the compressor or regulated output are referred to as primary controls. Thermostats that are operated by either the movement of a bimetallic element, the expansion of a fluid, or vapor pressure of a volatile liquid, all produce a mechanical effect. In a fluid expansion thermostat controller, what is used to adjust the difference between the cut-in and cut-out temperatures? A differential adjustment. Why can a pressure-actuated control not be used in conjunction with an automatic expansion valve? The automatic expansion valve maintains a constant pressure. In place of a hygroscopic element, what else may be used in a humidistat? An electrolytic hygrometer cell. Why are most condensers and compressors in larger refrigeration systems water-cooled rather than air-cooled? Water has a greater cooling efficiency. What causes the condenser cooling water regulating valve to open? The high side pressure rises as the condenser cooling load increases. Where is the sensing element of a low-limit thermostat immersed in order to avoid freezing the water in the water chilling system? At the coldest point in the chiller. What is an electronic component whose electrical resistance varies quickly and substantially in response to changes in temperature? A thermistor. What type of protection device uses a current transformer with a resistor in the motor circuit? Motor overload protection. What causes an automatic expansion valve to close? A buildup of pressure in the evaporator. When can an automatic expansion valve not be used? when more than one cooling coil is connected to the same compressor. How does a thermal expansion valve compensate for an evaporator with a large pressure drop? But using an equalizing line. What is usually installed around the external float chamber on large capacity systems to provide cooling if the float in a low pressure float valve should fail? A bypass line with a hand-operated expansion valve. What removes a section of a sectional evaporator from service when the load demand decreases? A solenoid. What is an advantage of using both a phase and bypass damper? The quality of air passing through the duct remains fairly constant. What is the term for operation of a compressor that is stopped when the desired low temperature is reached and is started up again when the temperature rises to a certain level? Intermittent operation. What actuates the cylinder bypass line when the suction pressure at the compressor drops to a preset value? A solenoid. What type of compressors are pneumatic vane operators used on? Centrifugal compressors. Why should the suction valve be left closed when starting larger compressors? To avoid excess starting torque and the resulting high power draw. At what point should a reciprocating compressor be stopped and the suction and discharge valves closed during the shutdown of the system? When the compressor suction reaches 14 kPa. What should be done during startup if the compressor is equipped with an oil sump heater? The heater should be energized to drive off any refrigerant. Why is it necessary to connect a temporary clean water supply when the refrigerant float chamber is empty on seasonal pre-start service of an absorption system? To provide pump motor lubrication and cooling. What is used as a testing medium for leak testing a refrigeration system? Nitrogen. What must be removed prior to performing a pressure test? Safety relief valves. What can be used to check for further small leaks if the pressure does not drop during a pressure test? A liquid soap solution. How is the leak test performed on a subatmospheric pressure refrigerant system? By shutting down the compressor, breaking the vacuum, and pressuring the system with dry nitrogen. What is used for leak detection in ammonia systems? Wetted litmus paper. When filling a liquid refrigerant system, when should the drum valve and charging valve be closed? When the correct amount of refrigerant has been added. What is an alternative to pumping oil into the compressor crankcase? use the compressor to draw a vacuum on the crankcase and draw the oil in. How often should oil drains be emptied? Once per week. How can congealed oil be removed from the evaporator? The system can be warmed up to allow the oil to drain. What would be a common cause of excessively high discharge temperatures from the compressor? Inefficient operation of the condenser. What could be a cause of low discharge temperatures from the compressor? Foaming in the evaporator. The ideal thermodynamic cycle for all heat engines is described as the Carnot cycle. The reverse Carnot cycle is characterized by what four processes in order? Adiabatic expansion, isothermal heat absorption, adiabatic compression, isothermal heat rejection. What is characterized by the critical point on a pressure enthalpy refrigeration cycle diagram? The point where no liquid can exist. The term ton of refrigeration is defined as the rate of heat removal sufficient to produce 1 ton of ice at 0 degrees Celsius in 24 hours. What is equivalent to 1 ton of refrigeration in terms of minutes? 232.6 kilojoule.